I make the process simple. We coordinate services being placed for the kids that are coming through the system, either on probation or parole, to make it easier for the probation officer to access the services. Whereas in the past, kids were coming before the courts, a lot of times the service because the funding was not available. So the judge was having to commit a kid to send them upstate to get those services. Whereby the director of the Department of DJJ, Mr. Block, we invested money on the front end so kids could get the services in the community so that they didn't end up in the institution. So that's how we kind of work with that. So we work with the probation officers, we work with the vendors as well, and we try, my job is basically is to look at the gaps and fill in those gaps to make sure we have services across the continuum to provide, whether it be individual therapy or whether it be substance abuse treatment or whatever, or even family intervention, was the biggest piece, because in the family, if you get the family on board, then the kids are going to probably move away from the system.
So talk to me about how this kind of leveled the playing field for all the areas, even if it's not, bringing as much money.
The way funding streams work, the smaller the locality, the less funding you get. And so it evens the playing field, because whether you are on the Eastern Shore or you're in Suffolk, you still can get the same level of service. FFT reaches all the way over to Eastern Shore and in between. Whereas in the past, if they didn't have a service like that for a family, they were having to send a kid upstate to get that service. So it levels the playing field. So just because of where you live, it doesn't matter. You still get the opportunity for the service.
So how do you figure out what help the kid needs? I mean, you're the guy that kind of disperses them into what's really going to fix them, that sounds horrible, fix their problems. I mean, how do you even begin that process?
It's all data-driven and driven by the evidence-based tools that they utilize, the Aesia, the youth assessment tool that they utilize to establish where the highest level of criminogenic factors are to deal with. So the probation officer has that at his disposal to look at that, and we discuss and collaborate on the best intervention to match up with this kid. Say, for example, if a kid's on probation and he is not attending school, he's getting in trouble, he's hanging out with the wrong peer set, and he's 14 years old, we may bring in family-focused therapy because he's young. So we're trying to build that relationship with that family and empower that parent to work with that child. Well, if it's MST for a younger kid with multi-systemic therapy, they come in and they empower the parents so that when they step back after 120 days, the parent still has those skill sets to deal with that child. And so if you empower the parents, sometimes when they get off probation, they stay out of trouble. The goal is to keep them from going further into the system and ending up in jail or in the adult system.
And before this, I mean, what were you seeing?
Well, because of the funding, and judges and probation officers are not supposed to be concerned about how much it costs to have a service in place, but that's automatically, we're considering that. And so the budgetary process, the CSU directors will have to decide whether can we serve this kid's need. He needs a long-term residential placement, which sometimes can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the parent doesn't have insurance. How can they pay for that? Well, we can send them upstate and they can pay for it that way. So now the kid does not have to go to the Department of Juvenile Justice to get the service. He can actually stay in the community, near his family, and still get the level of treatment that he needs.
How crucial is that, just to be able to stay close?
It's very crucial, because when you take kids out of their family, away from their family, it hurts them. I mean, sometimes you don't see it right away, but they act out, they're angry, they're striking out because their family's in Norfolk. They're all the way on the other side of the state, and they don't get a chance to see their family.
And I mean, for you, what's been the most rewarding part of being able to be hands-on with this?
I've been in the system almost 30 years, and I think the most enjoyable part for me is to be able to get the services in place much quicker. If I get a referral today, depending upon what's going on, the services can start in a couple of days.
And did you ever think it would be like this? Did you ever think that this would be, this transformation's huge just over the past couple of years.
Right. Well, it's a cyclical thing. Years ago, the department was more about rehabilitation, and depending upon who was the director, who was the governor, it determined the approach. And so we moved towards rehabilitation because really with juveniles, you should have rehabilitation efforts. And so it was more about pushing them through the system at one point in time. And like someone said earlier, Director Block has his vision of coming in and transforming the department to meet the needs of the kids so that they can have less kids in direct care in a large facility, being away from the family, and get the services in place while they're younger and have more opportunity to be impacted by the services. Because if you're younger, at 14, you have a chance to transition yourself. If you can change their thinking, you can change their behavior.
Wow. And so, do you know anything about because you work specifically with this region, as far as like the impact, so the numbers get lower. I mean, facilities are they closing? Staff numbers, are you needing as many people now that you guys are able to actually stop those numbers from coming in? I mean, really in the bigger scheme for you guys, what does this look like?
In the last 2 years, the numbers of kids that have been in direct care have come down. The probation caseloads are less. The intakes are less. So because of the transformation, it's a systematic approach. So if you change the front end, the probation, the kids coming through intake, assess for services, you put those services in place, they don't end up here in step 2. If they end up step 2, you put services in place and keep them from going further into the system. So you need less people on the back end. You move the money and the resources toward the front end. And so you can have smaller facilities where kids are getting the services that are really the more high-risk kids or in direct care, as opposed to the kids who are moderate and low-risk kids. So that's what you'll see. The numbers are lower in terms of less kids in the institution and more kids at home with their families getting treatment, going to a therapist or coming down to the probation office and meet with a therapist, as opposed to having to go up to a facility and be locked in and stay away from the family.
So there's not one right way to
No, it's absolutely individualized treatment is always the way to go. Every family system is different. So you walk in, you assess the family, and you figure out what to do in terms of the evidence-based models that are out there to do the assessments and the services that are available. And some of the probation officers are still processing and learning with training some of the clinical interventions that are needed. So we're working with them to do more training with our vendors as well, so we can all speak the same language, because DJJ may be speaking this language over here and the treatment providers may be speaking this language over here. So we come together and have training. One of our jobs also is to put quality assurance in place and make sure that our vendors are doing the things that they say, so we monitor that as well.